Well, I want to thank you for coming to Canyon Creek Church, the 11:30 service. Good to see all of you. I have been away in Africa for the last 2 Sundays. I had the privilege of traveling to Africa with one of my sons, with this amazing group, organization called Convoy of Hope. Our church supports Convoy of Hope, and they are really making an amazing difference in that region. I want to tell you just a couple stories. First off, I want to introduce you to a gal by the name of Margaret. Here she is. I had to travel probably 2 hours down a dirt road to find the Maasai village where Margaret lives. She's in her mid-50s, and 5 years before I met her, her husband had passed away, and she was widowed with 8 children. She was destitute, as poor as you can possibly imagine. And I have to try to contextualize what poor is like. Like when we think poor in America. But poor in America would be like filthy rich where she lives. When you say that she was destitute, I mean, it was really bad. And the culture that she lives is a very male-dominated culture. In fact, it would be normal for a man to have several wives, in addition, several girlfriends. It was commonplace in that culture for if a woman who is dating a man gets pregnant, that the man would kick her out and she would be living on the streets from that point on. And when Convoy of Hope met Margaret, she was destitute, broke, homeless with 8 children. 5 years later, I am meeting with her in her really nice house, and her house even has satellite cable. So I'm hearing this story, scratching my head, trying to, basically connect all of the dots, and here's the story. She was a part of a program called the Women's Empowerment Program with Convoy of Hope. Since they understand the culture that really tends to suppress women, they go in and they re-educate women and empower women. And basically, the purpose of this program is to train women to start micro businesses in their community, out of their home, and as that business grows and develops, to invest in even new businesses and to eventually become self-sufficient, not only for her, but maybe for her entire family. So Margaret's story is, Margaret went through the Women's Empowerment Program. Once she was done, she got a $100 micro loan that enabled her to buy the materials to make these bracelets, which she then made, a bunch of them, would travel 8 hours to the market and sell these to Maasai women. And Maasai women wear these as a sign of beauty. And believe it or not, they don't wear these on their wrists. They actually wear them on their ankles. But she did this for about a year, paid off her microloan. With her profits, was able to then invest in goats. So she started buying a bunch of goats that she would raise. Once she had 6 goats that were fully grown, she then took her goats to the market, sold her goats, and with the price of those 6 goats, she bought 1 cow. Now again, I'm trying to reconcile all of this as I'm sitting in her house, and I'm listening to this story, and so now she has 3 businesses. You know, she makes bracelets, she raises goats, and now she has cows. And I asked, what do you do with the cows? Because the Maasai culture, they don't eat meat. And she says, actually, I sell the milk. And she has like numerous cows now. And I, like any good Westerner, asked the big question, how much does a cow cost? And through their Swahili language translation, it came out that a cow costs $130 US. So like any good Westerner, here's what I thought. We're not leaving until we buy Margaret a bunch of cows. So I was the only preacher in the room. There's 8 businessmen with me. I raised my hand and I said, I don't know about you. Let's buy her some cows. And before I could even finish, I was shut down and corrected by everyone there. because they were explaining to me that that is the Western mindset. That the Western mindset sees a need in Africa, and what we do is we swoop in, buy a bunch of stuff, build a bunch of stuff, feel really good about ourselves, and swoop out. And I said, that's exactly what I wanted to do. And they said, we're trying to empower these women to no longer need us. So what we are trying to do is not buy them fish, but teach them how to fish. And so they said the best thing you could do for Margaret is to buy her bracelets. That starts this whole cycle. And when I started thinking about it, she sells bracelets to buy goats, to eventually sell goats, to buy cows, sell the milk. The whole process starts again. That's called capitalism. They're basically teaching her business. 5 years later, I said, how did she get this house? And she got this house from the proceeds of her 3 businesses. Did you know that she employs everyone in the community? Like when we were at her house, everyone in her community was making these bracelets in anticipation of Westerners coming to buy these bracelets. And so we came in, bought all of her bracelets, and basically what she was able to do is instead of have to make the 8-hour trek to the market, she sold them all there and could then take the proceeds, and the whole process starts again. Another thing I saw when I was in Tanzania were these wells. One of the things that our church does, whenever you fill out a connection card, we donate money to fresh water in Africa. We do that very, very proudly. But this is an example of a well. This is where the water actually comes from. The next picture shows you actually what generates the water out of the ground. And then finally, where does all the power from that come from? It comes from solar energy. Now, Convoy shared an incredible reality with us. It totally opened my eyes and messed with my paradigm. They said one of the dirty little secrets about wells in Africa is about 10 years ago, the U.S. became very much into providing fresh water in developing nations. So, for example, you go to Starbucks and you buy a certain water bottle, and they give money to buy wells in Africa. That churches all over America do what we do and donate money on a regular basis to buy wells in Africa. And Convoy of Hope said the dirty little secret about this well initiative in America, this clean water initiative, is that Africa is littered with broken down wells. So Westerners with great intent come in, build a well, and then leave, forgetting that wells break. The wells need to be maintained. On average, a well will break within 18 months. What Convoy of Hope does is not only do they build the well, but they train the locals how to maintain their well and to keep their well running, so that before the well is handed off to the village, they have the skills needed to make sure that that continues to function. That well is 8 years old. In the time since they built it, it is broken down 3 times, and 3 times the people in the village had a way to generate the money they needed to fix that well. And to this day, and for years to come, that well provides the only clean water in that entire village right there. When I thought about this, I thought, what Convoy of Hope is doing in the nation of Africa is they are leaving a legacy. You see, they leave a legacy by intentionally not planning on being there for a long time. They want to go in, develop the skills within the people so that the people for generations to come can sustain what has been invested in them. It is brilliant. Years and decades after Convoy of Hope has left Africa, generations will pass down to generations how to fix wells, how to start businesses, how to manage your money, how to be empowered. They are leaving a legacy in that region. Really, really, really cool. Back in January, I shared with our church a story from the Bible, and it was in Numbers 13, That's the beginning, and the end of it is in Joshua chapter 14. And when I shared this message with you, I introduced our theme for the year, which is do hard things. And in my notes, and these are my notes from 6 months ago, I have written here that I believe this word that I'm sharing to the church, this story from the Old Testament, that the application of this is a prophetic message for Canyon Creek Church. That this was for us, that it is for you individually, and that it is for us as a church corporately. And so when I shared it, I said it is a prophetic word that is meant to encourage you, but at the same time, it is meant to be a warning for other people. And at the end of this message, when I introduced the do hard things idea for the year, I said there are 4, I called them BHAGs, that we have as a church. A BHAG is a big, hairy, audacious goal. So there were 4 BHAGs for the year, and they were as follows. Number 1, our Palouse campus, which is in the Moscow, Idaho, kind of Pullman, Washington area, that they would raise money as a campus and remodel their facility. That was one goal. At the time, they had not even begun that process. Fast forward 6 months later, they have not only raised all of their money, but they have remodeled that building. So if you were to visit that campus today, that building has been totally remodeled since January. Okay, also in January, you might remember that we had just merged our Mill Creek and our Everett campuses together, and we had the intent to go back to Everett and to launch a campus there, and we were going to do it at Everett Community College. So since this message was shared, we have launched that campus. Fast forward to today, our campus at Everett Community College, outside of our central campus, is our largest campus we have. In addition to that, it is a totally self-sustained campus. It financially meets all of its obligations. For a new campus, that's a big deal. So the third goal we had was to not only launch a North Everett campus, but we wanted to launch a campus in Mukilteo. And we found a venue, Kamiak High School, and it was the Sunday after I shared this, we launched that campus. Fast forward to today, that campus last week had their record attendance, more than they had on Easter. That campus is also totally self-sufficient. And in fact, the campus pastor, Jeremy Olson, and I are talking right now with a property owner about buying the church building that they have so that that campus can actually have a permanent facility. This is all since January. I have long said that 1 year at Canyon Creek is like 7 years at another church. So, a lot happens in a 6-month period of time, but our 4th goal was our biggest one. And frankly, I would say that our 4th goal was the one that was the most mission critical. It was the one that really, long-term, mattered the most. And it was that we would break ground on a permanent facility for our central campus, that we would have a main campus built on this property. So going back to the story, Numbers chapter 13, it picks up where the Israelites had left captivity in Egypt. So, they'd had that miraculous deliverance from Egypt, and they left slavery in Egypt holding on to a promise that God had given them. God said, I'm going to bring you to the promised land. I'm going to bring you to Canaan. And they didn't know much about the promised land or Canaan, only what God had told them about it. Here's what the Lord said. God described it to them this way. He said, the promised land is flowing with milk and honey. Now, to them, that was a really big deal. Now, to us, who can go to the local grocery store, flowing with milk and honey, it doesn't really motivate me too much. So let me modernize it a little bit. So I was thinking, what would really motivate Brandon? So if God described the place as flowing with frost donuts and chocolate milk. So I want you to picture it that way. So God said, I'm going to bring you to a land that's full of frost donuts and chocolate milk, I would say that is Canaan. That is the promised land. So he promises them this. They don't know anything about it, and they get right to the edge of Canaan, right to the edge of the promised land. Standing in front of them is a mountain that they must conquer first. And they see this mountain knowing that the promised land is this close. I mean, it is so close you can taste that chocolate milk. It is that close. And sometimes you can be so close, but so far. So we pick it up in the story in Numbers chapter 13, verse 1, where God tells Moses, I want you to go to the 12 tribes of Israel, have each one of the 12 tribes of Israel choose one man to represent their tribe, and then I want you to take those men and send them in to the promised land to scope it out and tell you about it. Here's the story. It's really pretty funny. It's funny because of how little they knew. This was motivating them, but they didn't know much about it. So it says in verse 17, so Moses had gathered these 12 men together. I want to point out that these 12 men, each one is named, but there's only 2 of them you've ever heard of. Out of the 12, you've only heard about Caleb and Joshua. And I want to point out, there were 10 other men, but you only know 2, and you're about to find out why. So calls them all together, verse 17. So remember, they didn't know anything about what this was like. It says, go up through the Negev and into the hill country and see what the land is like. Like basically, we don't know anything about this. God promised it. He said it was flowing with, frost donuts and chocolate milk, but what is it really like? And he says, see what it's like. See whether there's people who live there or not. They don't even know if there's people there. And if there are people, see if there's few or many, if they're strong or weak. See if the land is good or bad, if it's fertile or not. They knew nothing about this land. And then it goes on, and this tells you how little they knew. It says, find out if there are trees there or not. They don't even know if there's a tree in the land. And then go in there and bring back some of its fruit to show me. So these 12 men go into this region. They come back bringing frost donuts, and they deliver them to Moses, and they report back what they've seen. And here it is. They gave Moses this account. We went in to the land to which you sent us, that God promised us. And they said, and it does flow with frost donuts and chocolate milk. And here is a donut to prove it. Here's its fruit. But then they followed it up by saying, but the people who live there are powerful, and their cities are fortified and very large. Church, can I ask you a question, just you personally? How many times have you done something, stepped out in faith, doing something you believed God called you to, and you got to the cusp of it, and all of a sudden, it wasn't as easy as you thought? And you followed it up by saying, but school's a lot harder than I thought. But this was more expensive than I thought. But this was way more challenging than I thought. How often have you got to the point where you're about to step out and do something that is huge, and then all of a sudden, it got more difficult than you imagined? So they go on, and they just describe how challenging this is, and their conclusion to Moses was, we can't do this. We can't do it. It's too difficult. It's too hard. We can't do it. Except Joshua and Caleb. Joshua and Caleb stood up and said, we should go up and take possession of the land, for we can certainly do it. But I will tell you something, that once someone gets discouraged, it is hard to turn things around. Because the people said, the men who'd gone up with Caleb and Joshua, said, we can't attack those people. They're stronger than we are. And they spread, and that spread among the Israelites a bad report about the land that they'd explored. They said, the land we explored devours those living in it. All the people we saw there of great size, we seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we looked the same to them. Have you ever said that? Have you ever looked at something you had stepped out in faith to do, and then when you got in the middle of it, you immediately thought, this is bigger than me? You immediately got into it and thought, I don't have the ability to do this. I don't have the strength. I don't have the skills. I don't have the intelligence. What did I get myself into? This is a bigger assignment than I can handle on my own. Have you ever tried something and then in the middle of it thought you feel like a grasshopper? And in fact, everybody in that world views you the same way. You see, the problem for the Israelites is they weren't seeing things the right way. They were looking at all of this through their own eyes and through the eyes of other people instead of the way they should, which was they're supposed to see themselves the way that God sees them. That God promised this. The same God that brought them out of Egypt. The same God that has done unexplainable miracle after unexplainable miracle for those people. That is the God who promised them this land. The God who says, greater is he that is in you than he that's in the world. That is the one that said, go take that mountain. But they couldn't get past themselves. They said, this is too hard. This is too big for me. Have you ever said that? Have you ever not done something because you convinced yourself it's too hard? Did you know that God was so mad at the Israelites for their lack of faith that God actually did this? He said, not one of you, other than Joshua and Caleb, will ever step foot in the promised land. In fact, your entire generation is going to die before you get a chance to walk into the promised land again. Have you ever gotten to that point where you stepped out in faith and you began to do something, but fear crept in and it controlled you in such a way where it paralyzed you? Has that ever happened before? We began the process of developing this property. I mean, we were going full steam ahead. I mean, it's been 6 months of architects and engineers and surveys and studies, and many of these things we'd been through before with our Highway 9 property, if you have any history with Canyon Creek. Well, these studies became like our Achilles heel on that Highway 9 property, because every time we got a study back, it came back worse than we'd imagined. Like, we'd do a wetland study, and we would find out we had created new wetlands. I mean, it was like the whole property was wet. I like walking on property that apparently is underwater. I don't know. We found out by the time it was done, the 17 acres, that only 4 of them were useful. And it just happened to be 4 acres like in the middle of the property. I'm like, how are we supposed to get to that? So every time we got a study back, it was worse news. And so we braced ourselves with this process. And every time we got a study back or a survey back, it was better than we'd expected. I am not joking. Wetland study comes back better than we could have imagined. The survey comes back better than we could have imagined. I mean, everything is going great, to the point where the city of Mill Creek met with us specifically to encourage us to get our permit in sooner. Okay, here's why. Because they have to shut down part of 35th to fix the flooding problem. And they thought it would be more conducive for the constituents of Mill Creek to only have the road shut down one time. And so they thought, since we're shutting it down already to fix the road, if you guys were building your property at the same time the road's shut down, we don't have to shut it down twice. And so we're like looking at them, so you're going to like help speed up our permit process? And they're like, yes. So I've got the city saying, give us a permit. We need you to build a building now. This is great. Full steam ahead. We got right to the cusp of the promised land. And then the month of May came. I don't know any other way to describe May other than to say, it sucked. Let me tell you how May went for me. In the history of Canyon Creek, we on our website, and I described this in 101, if you do the Discover class this afternoon, you'll hear me talk about it. But we have a year that I called the year of suck. And I know a lot of people don't talk that way, but I can't think of a better way to describe how bad the year was than describe it. And it was a year where everything went wrong for like an entire year. It was like one bad thing after another, and we refer to it in our history as the year of suck. Well, I refer to May as the month that really sucked for Brandon. So here's what happened to me in May, okay? And I'm not sharing this to be melodramatic. I'm sharing this to say we're on the cusp of the promised land, and I went in to scope out the land, and this is what I saw. So it was Wednesday night, the first Wednesday in May. You guys were all here at One Voice, and I had skipped One Voice and went to a movie. I'm embarrassed to admit, but I did. So I was really stressed and needed to decompress. I don't have any excuse. So I went to a movie by myself because I do that. I like going to movies by myself, primarily because I can sit in the back of the movie theater and goof around on my phone during the movie without my wife saying, "That's rude, stop doing that." I was with no one to tell me how rude it was to be on my phone during the movie. At about 7:30, my phone rang. I had it muted, so it just lit up, and it was our lender. And I thought, that is strange. It's 9:30 their time. This has got to be important. So I left the movie theater, answered the phone, to immediately find out that our lender was denying our loan for this building. It took about an hour to finally narrow down exactly what they wanted and what the issue was. But in a nutshell, they said, we cannot approve this loan unless you guys can bring an additional $1 million to the table. Church, I was crushed. You ask anybody on my team, out of everything I was expecting to find out, anything negative that could happen, that was the least of my worries. I had never considered that I would hear this. But lo and behold, that was what it was, and I felt like a grasshopper. And I felt like that is the way that everybody sees me right now. Threw my hands up. I was like emotionally, physically, I was done. Now, about a day later, I kind of picked myself up, and I shared in front of our church the following Sunday that Christian and I were leaving town to get away because we had a building issue. Some of you might shake your head and remember that conversation. You now officially have the backstory to it. So we had to figure out where we could come up with $1 million. How'd you like that job? So I'm proud to say that we locked ourselves away for 2 days, and we started just saying, Lord, we want to know what your will is. But the first thing is, help us be financially shrewd with the resources that the church has. So we went back to the church budget, and we made cuts and slashes and running lean, and we did all of these different things. In addition to the sizable growth that our church has had over the last 6 months, which has been a lot, and that has included increased giving, with all of that, we found an additional $500,000 for the next year. So our $1 million bill went down to $500,000, which first off, I felt that was a miracle in itself. And second off, I share that with you to say that the church is doing everything we possibly can to make this happen. Like everything. Like there are things that we have decided to not do in the next year, or things that we are running lean on that some of you would probably say, really? Yeah, but we are, because we want to get this thing done. And so we landed on $500,000, and we concluded this, that we had 3 options with this $500,000. Option number 1, we could give up. We could stop, quit. And that's really what happened to the Israelites that day. They gave up, stopped, quit. We could do that. I don't really feel like that is a faith-filled decision and is the right decision. So option number 2 was we delay the build. We were going to have the building done in about 1.5 years, 2 years. Instead, push it out to 5 years and wait 5 years. I wasn't thrilled with that because I don't want to talk about a new building for 5 years. I didn't want to. Or the third one was, let's go take the mountain. Let's go charge the hill. Let's get this thing done. Let's come up as a group of people that are a part of this community of faith together. Let's raise this extra $500,000 this year, and let's get her done. And ultimately, we decided that's what we're going to do. That we are going to go charge this mountain and get this thing done. The phrase that I used on Thursday night, I said, basically, we decided, let's just get the stinking building done. I mean, let's get it built. Let's get it done. So, going back to the story with the Israelites, 45 years literally pass. You jump to Joshua chapter 14, you read the end of the story. An entire generation of people has died, gone, out. The only ones left are Joshua, who is now leading Israel, because even Moses, the leader of Israel, had passed away, and Caleb is now an 85-year-old man. And once again, through all of their wandering in the wilderness, they are standing in front of that familiar mountain. The same mountain that God promised them 45 years before, they now have in front of them again. And as the Israelites are deciding, should we go take that mountain, in the middle of this discussion, Caleb gets involved. And it's verse 10 of chapter 14. Caleb says, "Now then, just as the Lord promised," again, 45 years ago, "He has kept me alive these 45 years, since the time he said this to Moses." So I want you to picture your grandpa here. Okay, this is what you need to picture. Picture like the most feisty elderly dude you've ever met. I mean, this is a guy, he's full on been collecting Social Security for a long time. He has been traveling around the Middle East in an RV. I mean, he's been doing all of the retirement stuff. And all of a sudden he says this. He says, "So here I am today, 85 years old." And he says, "I am still as strong today as the day Moses sent me out." Can you picture your grandpa saying this? And then he goes on and he says, I love the next part, "I'm just as vigorous to go out to battle now as I was then." And then Joshua 14:12, which, church, this has become my rallying cry for our church this year. He says the famous line, he says, "Now, give me that mountain that the Lord promised me on that day." Then it jumps ahead to verse 13. It's kind of amazing. It then just says, "Then Joshua blessed Caleb and gave him Hebron as an inheritance." You don't read anything about the battle. You just know that he won. They won, and he got blessed because of it. Can I tell you what I think this building means for us? I believe this building will be our legacy in this community. This is part of it. You might not know the significance of what we are trying to do, so let me give you a little history. Mill Creek was established in the 1970s. It was established by a group of Japanese families who built a golf course and built a bunch of houses around that golf course. Mill Creek was meant to be an oasis in the middle of nowhere. Now, I grew up kind of in the Bothell area in the 80s around here, and I remember driving down Bothell Everett Highway. I remember driving up 164th when it ended, okay? I remember driving up 132nd when it ended at the Buffalo corner. Okay, there used to be nothing here. This was in the middle of nowhere. And it was intended to be an oasis, a peaceful place that you would discover in the middle of nowhere. And when these families established this area, they specifically, intentionally set aside no land for public places of worship. You see, in their culture, they believed that like churches and public places of worship stirred up spirits. And they made it so it wasn't a peaceful place. And they wanted this to be a peaceful place. In about 1984, Mill Creek incorporated as a city, and since then has annexed in many different areas, and many of you that live in Mill Creek, your area has been annexed in later on, and every Christian church in the city limits of Mill Creek was annexed in, was not built. Okay, was not built since the city was incorporated. When we met with the city about this process, here's what we were told. This is even from the city, that they have never done this before. That they have never had a Christian church go through the permitting process to build a church in the city of Mill Creek. We are about to build the very first and possibly only Christian church that will ever be built from beginning to end in these city limits. Partially, there's a number of reasons. Number one, this is an expensive area, and there's just not a lot of land. And we just happen to be one of the only organizations with a decent amount of land. So what we are doing, someday, people are going to drive down 35th, 20, 30 years from now, long after our kids are leading this church. And people will drive down this, and they'll see our church building here, and they'll know our church and know our reputation in the community. And they will think, oh, that is the church they go to. And they'll call you. And they'll say, how did you guys do that? Man, how did you guys build that building in that location? And you and I will remember back to this moment. When we were on the cusp of entering the promised land, and immediately we realized we faced giants. We realized immediately that the city is fortified and walled, and it's full of many people that view us like we're grasshoppers. And we had to make a decision in that moment. What are we going to do? Are we going to retreat? Are we going to delay? Or are we going to charge forward? And church, I want to challenge you. I think now is our moment. I believe that the Lord is saying, go take the mountain. And so here's what I want to challenge you to do. I want you to grab the program, grab the connection card on the back. You will notice that we have this pledge card. We're going to do this only for 2 weeks. I'm hoping that after 2 weeks, we receive $500,000 in pledges, and we don't talk about this again. All you hear is updates on how the building is progressing. That's my hope. But I want to encourage your family to do what my family is doing, which is prayerfully considering what you will give over and above your tithe in the next 12 months to help us finish this building. We need $500,000 more dollars, and in a church our size, that is really not that big a deal. We should be able to do this. There is no reason we can't do this. And here's what I want to encourage you with. I want to mess with your thinking, okay? I am not asking you to sacrifice. I want to emphasize that. Like, I'm not telling you, go get a second on your house, go cash out your 401k. I'm not encouraging you to go sell something. What I'm asking you to do is for 1 year, inconvenience yourself a little bit. Maybe there's some plan that you had, something that you were saving for this year to do. Hold off a year. Give to this and do that the following year. Let me tell you what our family has decided to do. We have an Israel trip as a church next year, and we were going to take our entire family to the Israel trip. So Di and I have been saving every month to take our kids to Israel. And then the reality of this came in, and the reality of having to lead the way in this hit me. And so what Di and I have decided to do is we won't take our kids to Israel this time, but next time. We do it every 2 years. Israel's not going anywhere, but our opportunity to do what God has called us to do, the opportunity is now. And so we're going to inconvenience ourselves this, deny ourselves this, so that we can do this. One of the illustrations that I gave on Thursday night is 2 years ago, I bought a house that was built in the 70s, one of those original houses in Mill Creek, and my house needed a new roof. How many of you like putting a new roof on your house? Anybody? How many of you love spending the money on putting a new roof on? Anybody out there? I didn't want to do it, but I had to do it. Why? Because I'm a homeowner and I'm responsible. Sometimes you have to. Well, a year ago, I couldn't figure out why my heat bills were so high. And they came in and did an assessment, and they said, because you have aluminum windows, it sucks all the heat out. You need new windows. These windows were put in the 70s, and most of them are failing. And I went, how much do new windows cost? And they said $11,000. And I thought, there's a lot of vacations that I could go on for $11,000. But what did I do? I replaced my windows. Why? Because that's what you do as a homeowner. There are certain things that you do, even though you're not thrilled with doing, because it's part of the cost of ownership. We don't have members at Canyon Creek. We have owners. We encourage everyone, if you are not an owner yet, to eventually go through the process of being an owner. This building that we are about to build, my name is not on the deed to the building. Christian's name is not on the deed to the building. Colton's name, Tony's name, Di's name. We're not on the elders. Their name's not on the deed to the building. Who owns the building? The members of Canyon Creek Church. We own this building. The building that we build, this is our building. And sometimes when you own something, you have to keep it up. Sometimes you have an expense that you weren't expecting. And what do? You don't just say, well, I'm going to let my roof fall apart and leak. You look at your finances, you make some cuts, you make some adjustments so you can afford to replace the roof. And so what I'm asking you to do is just prayerfully consider what you can inconvenience yourself with this year. I don't know about you, but I don't want to talk about this for 5 years. Anybody else? Like, do you want me to come up and have to talk about this for 5 years? Let's get her done. Let's go take this mountain and be done. So here's what I'm going to do. I want you to take this card. If you are not ready yet to make a pledge, wait till next week. But I really truly believe that the Holy Spirit has been dealing with some of you. That's honestly what I believe. I believe that before you got here, you had felt, I got this bonus, I'm supposed to give this to the church, I don't know what for. Or I got this raise, I don't know what for. After the Thursday night service, I had somebody that came and said this to me. Here's what they said. After the service, they said, my wife and I, we parked over there and we were walking down the trail to come to the church. And we were talking about how blessed we've been financially this year. And they looked at each other and said, you know what we should do this year? We should double our giving this year. She said, then we came in, we sat down, and we heard this message, and they said, and now we know why. I just thought that was amazing. I believe the Lord has already been working on some of your hearts. If you are ready to pledge, I invite you to do that today. If you need to wait until next week, just turn in your connection card with your regular information, and we can get your pledge next week. But our goal is $500,000. I want to close by saying this, and I'm going to invite our ushers to make their way forward. We'll get ready to receive the offering. After Christian and I had put together this plan, our lenders flew in from the Midwest to meet with us. So they actually flew in to meet with us. We sat down and we shared our plan, and then we kind of had this mutual look each other in the eyes, and they said, Brandon, if you can get pledges and make cuts that will come up with this $1 million, we will lend you the rest of the money you need to build this building. So they said, you do that, and we will do our part. And now it's our chance to do ours. I want everybody to stand up on your feet. I want you to hold this pledge card in your hand. One last story, just because it's really cool. So Thursday, we introduced this to our Thursday night service. And on Friday, Paul and our project manager, Bruce French, had an important meeting with the city. And it was, I called it kind of a Hail Mary with the city. And the biggest struggle that we had was once we break ground, we had to relocate our entire ministry for a year. Like our church, all of our midweek things, everything needed to relocate for a year. And we didn't know what to do. And that is because the city of Mill Creek requires that buildings be built on the front of the property because they don't want people driving by parking lots. They want them driving by pretty buildings. So we thought, let's try and get them to agree to let us put our building on the back of the property. Now, if we were able to do that, it would make it so that during the building process, we didn't have to tear this building down. So we could keep having services here. We could have CR here, SOML here, youth here, MOPS here, everything could continue to be here. And it's been a huge stress for the staff figuring this out, huge stress for my team. And once again, I'm at a movie, and I get another phone call, and this time it's Paul, and Paul said, believe it or not, the city of Mill Creek has okayed our plan to put the building on the back of the property. Now, here is the spiritual analogy to this. What did Jesus say? He said, if you have faith as small as a mustard seed. He said, all you need to do is have that much faith, and if you do, I will move mountains for you. So what is Jesus saying to you and I? He's saying, do you have faith for $5,000 for your family? Do you have faith for $10,000? Do you have faith for $1,000? If you have faith like this, I will do things like this. Yeah, come on, I will move mountains for you. So grab your card, grab the hand of your spouse if you're by them, and let's pray. Lord Jesus, speak to our hearts right now. Yes, God. We lay our plans, we lay our desires at your feet, and we ask, build up faith within inside of us to go take our mountain. Speak to every family in our church and challenge them with what they should give. And Lord, together we are believing we will well meet the need that we have as a church. And Lord, we commit all of this process to you. And everyone said, amen.